Welcome back into another edition of the Arrowhead Pride Chiefs Training Camp Report. It is day 2 of full team practice in St. Joseph, Missouri. I am Steven Serda, joined as always by the leader of Arrowhead Pride, Pete Sweeney. Some people call him Peloton Pete now. Swain, did you manage to stay dry on Monday? How rainy was it up there in St. Joe?
Yeah, I'm glad that I'm not doing any of the local TV hits that I do today because my hair does not look great from walking to camp right now. It is curly and messy. Steve, you know that my hair curls up in the heat, so was able to make it through the rain. They started practice indoors, so the warm up occurred inside, and it was season ticket member day today. So kudos to the organization for realizing a lot of its most passionate fans were waiting outside to see this practice. And so the rain continued through, I would say, about, the first 15, 20, 30 minutes of practice. Then they came out for what would be, the 7-on-7, the 11-on-11, and the special teams period.
So we'll get into everything that you need to know about Monday's practice and all the details. But I think where we have to start off, which we're going to have to do this each and every day, Pete, until Chris Jones shows up to training camp. Still no sign of him on Monday, but hopefully negotiations are moving in the right direction and the Chief superstar will be in St. Joe sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to say that I feel like the situation is in a good place right now. I know there's optimism that by the end of camp on both sides, they'll finally come to some sort of an agreement. But just in the way that I think Andy Reid was speaking about the situation yesterday makes me feel like it's just not necessarily in a good place right now. It seems like the sides are far apart enough for the Jones camp to float out far up the words far apart to the Adam Schefters of the world, and then you had Andy Reid, and you could tell from I think his short-windedness with the answers that he didn't really want to talk about it yesterday. And so from a Chiefs standpoint, I think what they're doing right now is just moving on. They're going to practice without Jones, and then hopefully somewhere down the line these two sides come together and get him into camp. But I know I had said in previous reports that I expected him to be here Wednesday or Thursday sometime this week because of the fines. And I don't know. I'm just getting some feelings that maybe Jones doesn't care that much about the fines, since in this new contract, he'll get quite an extensive signing bonus that'll cover all of it.
Yeah, I just feel like we've seen so many veterans now do these hold-ins. I feel like he's got to show up sooner or later, unless they are really far apart on these contract negotiations, which is kind of a detriment to what we've kind of heard and been reported all summer.
The key for me yesterday, and this is where my pessimism comes from, was Andy Reid being asked about the communication between the two sides, and him essentially saying we had communication until a little bit ago and now we don't, which means they maybe got to a point in negotiations where they just needed to take a break. And at them taking a break kind of would lead me to believe maybe Jones wouldn't show up. Again, it's a lot of speculation right now, but I'm trying to share what I feel and things I've heard these past few days. I don't think it's impossible that this gets back to a good spot, but I don't think it's in a good spot right now.
Yeah, and as was pointed out by our team here at Arrowhead Pride, that interior of the Chiefs' defensive line is not great. If you start looking ahead and thinking like, oh, are they actually going to spend time without Chris Jones? So they obviously need to get him there. Hopefully negotiations start moving in the right direction and we start hearing some positive updates when it comes to the Chiefs' star pass rusher. But I want to get caught up on everything that we saw at Monday's practice. And obviously no Turk Wharton still, as he's working his way back from that season-ending ACL injury. But positive note, rookie offensive lineman Wanye Morris was back on the field. So you like to see that after he missed Sunday's practice. But concerning is wide receiver Kadarius Toney. We've talked a ton about his inability to stay on the field so far in his young NFL career. And I don't want to say we got any kind of update. I think we'll get that tomorrow from Andy Reid, but it doesn't seem like it's super positive right now from Kadarius Toney, who injured himself fielding punts, not even in practice, really.
No, we didn't see him today. The Chiefs said that he hurt his knee shagging punts yesterday. That was something I put out onto Twitter. And the update we got today was no practice, but Chiefs PR representative Ted Cruz says that coach will have more on that situation potentially tomorrow. Then Travis Kelce was asked what they're missing with Kadarius Toney, and the way that he was talking, it kind of seemed like it'll be an extended period of time. The vibes that I'm getting right now is I don't think we're going to see him at least for the next week. Maybe this is something that is serious enough to cost him camp, maybe not so much the regular season. But again, I'm not going to put any of that into print until we get some more clarity. It's just something I could talk to you about in this medium, because those are the vibes I'm getting right now. I don't feel like it's an injury that is going to be day to day. I think this is maybe something that's going to be at least a week, maybe a few weeks.
Yeah, that is not what Chiefs fans want to hear. And again, we're hoping for more positive update from Andy Reid tomorrow when he speaks with the media. But it does not seem like the vibes are great around Kadarius Toney, this player that the Chiefs have billed as their wide receiver one.
The vibes are not immaculate right now at camp, Steve.
Yeah, not great. Not really what you want to hear. But thankfully, the Chiefs have loads and loads of wide receiver bodies on that team. And we'll get into some of the guys who are making plays in Kadarius Toney's absence today on the practice field. But I want to get into the cornerback group. And we heard from Trent McDuffie, but seems like the Chiefs are kind of working him and L'Jarius Sneed back in slow. And we were seeing a lot of Joshua Williams, Jalen Watson. And I think you even mentioned Nazeeh Johnson made a couple of plays on Monday.
Yeah, Nazeeh Johnson had the best day. I think I counted 3 pass breakups, more when I throw out the thread a little bit later when I go over my notes. But Nazeeh Johnson really, I think, has solidified himself on this roster. Remember, this was a player that had to work his way onto the 53 last year. Dave Toub called him toward the end of the season potentially the best gunner in the league, and now he's making plays on defense. L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie, they had issues, I believe it was with their lower body, that kept them out of practice during OTAs. They are being eased in on a rep count. So, see, we saw a lot of different combinations of cornerbacks right here on Monday, with Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams outside, Trent McDuffie, L'Jarius Sneed outside, Trent McDuffie going inside, and sometimes Joshua Williams was there instead of Jalen Watson. You had DiCaprio Bootle getting some looks inside. Nick Jones, the 7th rounder from this year, getting looks inside. And this is all with the top team. So they're mixing and matching a cornerback right now, and a lot has to do with those rep counts for L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie. And that's the right move. You want to ease these guys in right now, and what it leads to is getting to see guys like a Nazeeh Johnson, like a Nick Jones make plays. And so there's always a solace to some of these availability issues that happen in training camp, because you get to see the younger guys. And that's part of the reason you saw the McDuffie injury last year. That's part of the reason Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams make the impression they did. And now, again, you don't want injuries, but you're seeing some of these younger guys step up.
And we've talked a lot about the at least projected versatility of this Chiefs secondary. So I think early on, especially in camp, where they're still kind of ramping things up and kind of lighter practices, where we're seeing this media availability come in pretty quick, because they're not spending a ton of time out on the practice field as they get everybody healthy and make sure they're ready to go for the season. I think as Chiefs fans, you should really like the versatility that they're showing in the secondary early on in training camp.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I think they feel like they're really deep when it comes to the defensive back room. And what's amazing about that is they're really young, right? So it's not like you're necessarily having too many of those long-term veterans like a L'Jarius Sneed. It's these young guys, and that was something that Trent McDuffie talked about after practice, just talking about bringing a guy like Nick Jones along as a vet. And I stepped back and I said, Trent McDuffie, you just said vet, and this is your second year, and you said, yeah, I mean, we're a lot of us guys are in our second year, and they don't want to have that first year feel like a fluke. They know what they accomplished last year, but the amazing thing about this Chiefs secondary, and you look at all these defensive backs, is there's still room to grow. They are still in their second year, and that's something they acknowledge. And you see that a point of emphasis right now for the whole defense. Spagnuolo talked about this was being top 10 in defensive efficiency. McDuffie said both personal and for the entire defensive back room, they want to put more emphasis on taking the football away this year. And man, if you give Patrick Mahomes more opportunities, you know what that can lead to. So good vibes from the defense right now, and Trent McDuffie specifically, but also the defense as a whole.
And I want to talk about some standouts on the offensive side of the ball, because I saw you mention on Twitter that, or actually, I'm not gonna. No, it's Twitter. We're calling it Twitter. We're not changing the name. I refuse. But I want to talk about some standouts, because you mentioned several guys who were making plays on Monday for the Kansas City Chiefs on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I exceeded that Deneric Prince looks to be one of these guys who is going to really make an impression as a rookie. We know that he's already going to be the kick returner, but I'm telling you, Steve, he is just not dropping any passes. I mean, passes that he shouldn't be making. You're going to get memories of Justin Houston running down the field, but George Karlaftis was playing Deneric Prince pretty closely down the line, and we know that the big body of George Karlaftis and what he can do as far as blocking the football. They were down the right sideline, and I'm telling you, Karlaftis had good coverage. I know that sounds insane, but he had really good coverage on Deneric Prince. Prince turns around and is able to make a one-handed catch, and that's been all camp. These opening days of camp, everything that's thrown in his direction, he seems to be coming down with. And Jay Binkley, 610 Sports Radio, texted me as I was tweeting that out. It doesn't seem like Tulsa realized how good of a pass catcher numbers were not there in college for Deneric Prince, and I think one of their the Chiefs now, one of the Chiefs' number one things they like about Deneric Prince is just his ability to catch a pass and get upfield. A lot of zip, and you're seeing that there's just an extra gear that, and this is part of the problem in the NFL right now, there's an extra gear that these rookie running backs have just coming out of college because they're fresh. And they don't have the wear and tear of the NFL, and Prince is certainly falling under that category, especially right now in the quick pass game.
I think that's one of the more interesting things, coming out of rookies and quarterbacks and then veterans. And we know they're still ramping up and trying to get those guys on the field and make sure they're healthy for the entirety of camp and the preseason and everything. But we kind of felt like this running back room, and I know Isaiah Pacheco is still working his way back, non-contact, all that stuff. Jerick McKinnon, we know he's a super seasoned veteran who the Chiefs just aren't going to give a ton of early season reps to, because that's the way they like to manage McKinnon. And then Clyde, all of a sudden with Deneric Prince showing out and making these plays and kind of announcing himself this early in Chiefs training camp, that running back room is a little curious with all the wide receiver bodies, all the secondary members, all the linebackers. As we start to break down this roster and we get closer to the regular season, it seems like Deneric Prince is pushing, at least really early on in camp, to be more than just a special teams contributor. He's a guy that could come in and give the Chiefs some valuable snaps on offense.
Yeah, the Chiefs have a luxury right now when it comes to skill position players. And I know a lot of people will roll their eyes at that, especially when, there's no, I guess right now, healthy, clear-cut number one wide receiver. But I do think that there's a lot of players the Chiefs like and trust, and I think it's going to make conversations about that 53-man roster tough. I had mentioned in my first 53 projection, I wonder if someone like a Blake Bell gets cut. But you're making a good point about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. When you just think about that room, and if Deneric Prince can really show out, I don't think the Chiefs would have any problems getting P. Ryan onto the practice squad, so that maybe that could be your fourth back in an emergency type of situation. And maybe that's where you find your seventh receiver instead, or maybe that's where you find your 10th offensive lineman. And maybe it isn't necessarily a straight up cut for Clyde. Maybe he becomes a trade piece. Maybe they do want 4 running backs, and then suddenly Bell is in trouble in the back end of that room. There's a lot of questions that go into it when you're trying to build this 53. Will they keep a 6th receiver? Will they keep a 7th receiver? A lot of interesting questions to answer. And fortunately for the Chiefs, they have a long training camp this year. What are we on, the 24th of July? This goes to the 17th of August. So there'll be plenty of time to think about what they want to do here.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I'm struggling to think of a time in the Patrick Mahomes era where they had so much depth, it seemed like, across the board, across the entire roster, where once it comes down to finalizing that 53-man roster, the Chiefs are going to have to make some tough decisions, it seems like, because they got a lot of talent in training camp right now. So it'll be interesting to see how things continue moving forward, especially as these guys get healthier. But on Monday, we heard from defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo, tight end Travis Kelce, wide receiver Sky Moore, and cornerback Trent McDuffie. Before we get out of here, Pete, any other major takeaways from the guys that we heard from on Monday?
No, I think one an interesting wrinkle that I I was able to ask Travis Kelce about, I'd been thinking about it for a while, is there had been this theory that all he does is just run whatever route he wants. And so I wanted to clear that up a little bit and ask him about his freelancing. And I thought this was an interesting point from Kelce, who does, I think, have a little bit of leeway with Mahomes to get creative when the time comes. But he said 99% of the time, I'm running what Big Red draws up, and he's just drawing it up so well. And I thought that was really fun. He's excited to be here. He's excited about camp. He realizes that it's important. I know there had been some worries about Kelce and what he's been able to accomplish off the field with all the entertainment stuff. But man, he is geared up and he's ready to go for training camp. And we talked about some of the defensive things. We talked about Sky Moore, and so if you want to hear them in detail, Steve, I know you'll be putting it up in that From the Podium section here on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network.
Yeah. And actually, if you're listening to us on the Chiefs Training Camp Report podcast, I will have all of Monday's press conferences coming up immediately after the commercial break. So as always, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review everything that we do here on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. Follow all of our training camp coverage from the Arrowhead Pride team at arrowheadpride.com. You can follow Pete at PG Sweeney on Twitter. And after all of that, an exciting Monday in St. Joseph, Missouri. We will be back with everything you need to know from Tuesday's practice tomorrow.